Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time out to be with us today, and welcome to our second in-house counsel forum program. I'm Prasanji Chakravarti. I'm a M&A partner in Ketan's M&A corporate team. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to this webinar to every one of you, whether you are in our audience in India or around the world. In-house program is a new program from Ketan in this year, following the tremendous success which we have tasted in the last couple of years virtual M&A programs, thanks to lovely support by you all, comprising of the erudite and wonderful audience which we have experienced in the last couple of years. So thanks very much for your support. In-house counsel forum is designed to be a private educational program and a discussion forum tailored for the in-house counsels teams in India. The program is structured to provide bespoke professional training and education not only in substantive law but also management and other topics of interest to in-house counsel. The forum is private in the sense that participation is by invitation only and not open to the public at large. We issue invitations by email to general counsels, chief legal officers, and senior in-house counsels in clients and close associate of the firm. And those invitations are extended to not only those individuals concerned, but also all the members of the respective in-house teams. We hope through this process we can provide tremendous continuous legal training and education to in-house teams on matters of interest to them and their companies. Let's go to the slide on the agenda. There you go. So on this slide, as you can see, is the agenda for today's webinar. In short, the webinar format will be really a discussion with our two expert panel members whom you can see on the screen, followed by a Q&A session with audience questions. We hope that you will make the session interactive, and we do invite you to ask questions during the webinar as and when any thoughts crosses your mind. We've already received several audience questions in advance. If you have a question, please submit the question using the facility in the webinar portal. If we cannot cover all the questions during the webinar, we will respond offline by email after the webinar. Also, please note that a summary note of this webinar will be sent to you separately after the webinar over email. Let's introduce the topic to you before diving into the discussion. As you already know, strategy is concerned with how one achieves defined goals and objectives. That is how you get from where you are today to where you want to be aspirationally. Increasingly, in-house counsels like you are concerned with strategy in at least, I would say, two different contexts. The first strategy context is how the in-house counsel team either contributes to or at its lowest level acts consistently with the corporate strategy of the company or organization you work for. The second strategy context relates to the strategy which in-house counsel use to achieve the goals and objectives of the in-house counsel team, which is important whether you have a small team or a large in-house team, doesn't matter. Accordingly, the knowledge and skills related to understanding, developing, and implementing strategy is of increasing significance to the in-house counsel community in their corporate life, which is the reason why we decided to offer this program today. The scope of this subject is obviously enormous, and we could not hope to do justice in the space of hour which we have earmarked and allocated for this discussion. What we are aiming to achieve through this session is to provide you with the ideas, with the key ideas and thinking around strategy from the two expert panelists. With that, I think let me introduce to you to the two expert panelists for today. On the left hand side of the screen, you can see Simon. Now, before that, every person who has registered for this webinar today has already received an email providing credentials of our experts on our panel today. So I will not really spend much time repeating or summarizing their credentials. Suffice to say, they are both former in-house counsels in UK with a great deal of experience and have excellent credentials to speak on this topic. Simon McCall is business coach and consultant, director of Sherwood PSF Consulting in the UK. Ian White is a management consultant, executive coach, and accredited mediator in the UK. Simon and Ian are also co-authors of two books written specifically for in-house counsels, namely Your Role as General Counsel, How to Survive and Thrive in Your Role as GC, and Managing and Developing Your Career as In-House Lawyers. I've gone through both these books and I can tell you these are wonderful books. So if you haven't read this, strongly urge that you must lay your hands on to it and go through it. So without further ado and delay, let's dive into the discussion and let me bring in our expert panel members. If I can start with Simon, if I can request Prajay to take off the slides now, we can then just focus on the panelists better. There you go. Thank you very much. First question, if I may ask, and again, just to make it conversational, I will request Simon and Ian, both to supplement each other, chime in wherever appropriate. The first question really is the very basic. What do you mean by a legal strategy in the in-house context?
It sounds like a simple question, but it's a great question. What is a legal strategy? I think it answers the question about purpose. Why is there a legal team? What are the legal team trying to achieve? And I always like to think of what I call the elevator test, in that if you can imagine your in-house counsel or one of the team, you're standing on the ground floor outside the elevator, and the CEO, he or she, walks up to you and says, "All right, yes, you're one of the lawyers. We've got 14 of you on the fourth floor. Why are you here? Why are you here?" And saying, "Well, we're all very busy doing lots of important legal work," is not an answer to the question, why are you here? It's describing that we're busy, that we're active. So I think that's what a strategy is. What is the purpose of the legal function?
Excellent. I think the elevator test, wonderful example, and I think one should definitely keep that in mind. Next time you run into someone, keep the elevator test up your sleeves. Ian, you want to supplement to that? And because it's a rudimentary question and would be good to have your thoughts as well in brief.
Yeah, I think what I would also say, I mean, a strategy is very important, and that's obviously what we're here to talk about today. But one of the things you will need with a strategy to make it successful, I'm sure we'll come on to this, is you have to have the people to make it work. It's only the people within the organization, whether that's a legal department strategy or it's the marketing strategy or the overall company strategy. You must have the people, and the many of you may have come across a very famous business writer called Peter Drucker, who I think was the person who immortalized the phrase "culture eats strategy for breakfast." I.e., strategy is important, but actually the culture of the organization is absolutely key. So what we're talking about today, we can and we mentioned this in the book, is you can you want a clear path to where you're going, but ultimately it's the people and the culture of the organization which will make that strategy successful or not.
Excellent. I couldn't agree with you more. I think connected question really is, of course, we're talking about legal strategies. We are speaking to GC community right now, but how really, I mean, this legal strategy relates to the vision, strategy, and mission of the company. How do those two kind of interweave and relate to?
I think that's so important, that the legal function, and that's, we'll come on to this, but I think there are three strands to the legal function. But the legal function sits with and works alongside the business in terms of strategy, and, as Ian said, culture. I think, putting it dramatically but simply, is if you're in a business that's very entrepreneurial, high risk, always looking to do more, push the boundaries, expand, go into new areas, launch new products. You don't want a legal function that, as I've heard it described in one organization, you don't want to be known as the business prevention department with the sign above your door which says we like to say no. That I think there's just out of sync there. So you want a legal team and a legal function that's in tune with the business. It could be the other way around. It could be, you can imagine, in financial services, a bank that wants to be cautious. We want to be very cautious. Our strategy is, we want to make sure we can just open for business tomorrow. We don't get shut down by the government or anyone else. So please, legal, help us be cautious. So that's aligning, and it is a mixture of culture and strategy. Let's align the two together. I mean, it's unlikely you've got a very ambitious entrepreneurial business and it wants a very cautious legal department. I can't see that. So that's the fit of the business strategy and the legal function strategy.
Interesting. So I think the next connected question is again something I, during the prelude, touched upon, and many GCs and the legal team will wonder, why is it important for a corporate law department or in-house team, for that matter, to have a legal strategy? I mean, why is it so fundamental that we must have a strategy in place?
I think that is I always like to, if I'm working with in-house lawyers or people in private practice, to leading a team, to just almost write down on a piece of paper, we will know if we have had a good year if X happens, Y happens, A happens, B happens. How would you know you're doing well? And that's why it's important, because otherwise you just are busy doing real estate work or busy doing contractual work. But how will we know if we've had a good year? In the same way, I always think the legal function needs to be able to answer the same sorts of questions that any other function would be asked. So marketing, why are you here? Well, we're here to keep our existing customers and help the business win new customers. R&D, why are you here? Well, we're here to make sure that there are new products for the business to sell in 10 years' time. So I think the lawyers need to have quite simple and convincing an answer to that question as any other part of the business. Ian.
Yeah, so no, I'd agree with all of that, Simon. I think it's absolutely right. I think I'd like to come back really partly to this question, but also to the one that we've just talked about. And the importance of having a legal strategy is because different companies, even when in the same sector, will have a very different attitude to risk, for example. And Simon mentioned the example of financial services being quite conservative and cautious. I think he's absolutely right there. I think people think, certainly when I talk to people, they think financial services will be very quick and things will happen straight away, but because it's so heavily regulated, that definitely isn't the case, and it takes time to get things done. Whereas if you look at retail, for example, certainly in the UK, it's much more fast moving. Things are, I mean, I remember working in retail, my CEO saying things needed to be done yesterday, and they did. Why I say that is, when you're a legal department, you need to be clear on those types of things. So it is the culture, but the strategy as well. what's expected from you, and what would be expected from some legal department in a retailer will be very different from the strategy that would be expected in something like financial services. And it's important for you as well when you're looking at a company to join, because you might be, I mean, most lawyers are naturally cautious, but some are less so. If you are very cautious, you might not want to be in a department that's very fast, makes decisions very quickly. I like to reflect on things before I make a decision. So actually being in a very fast moving, the decision's got to be made yesterday, is quite challenging for me. So I think that's why it's very important to have firstly to make sure that your legal strategy is linked to your corporate strategy, but also that you have got your strategy, so where you fit within the organization. I'm sure we'll come on to more of that.
Yeah. Can I just add, I've used the words legal function a couple of times, and I think that's quite important. Just explain what I mean by that, because I always think the legal function for a business comprises probably three elements. One is the in-house legal team, the obvious people who've got the label, lawyers in the business. Then there are the outside lawyers that the organization will use, and the people in the business who are not lawyers but actually do have a legal function. And you can imagine people in HR, they are more or less every day doing something that's about employment law, probably. People who are negotiating contracts are doing contract law. So I think those three elements comprise the legal function. And so, part of the role of the in-house legal team is to educate, monitor, supervise, encourage both the outside counsel and the people inside the business who do have a legal role.
Interesting. I think seems, there's no one size fit all. I think we have to work together with the relevant stakeholders in order to kind of implement a strategy. I think the next question people may have is, fine, we understood the importance, significance, but how should a strategy look like? If, let's say, some of our audience member reaches out to Simon and Jan, say, please help me draw up my legal strategy. So what would be some tips about what key components should a legal strategy comprise of?
Will I start with that one? I think we will. I don't know if this is the time to do it, but we were, thinking about how do you actually create a legal strategy. But I think what it's going to comprise is what areas are we going to focus on? Because I think it's very obvious, but particularly, the in-house legal team cannot do everything. So what is it we're going to do? And that's prioritized by the overall legal strategy, the strategy of the business. So what does it make sense for us to spend time on, and either not spend time on, or someone, an outside law firm, does it? But when you're looking at actual measures, it will be things like spend on legal activities. It will be, if it's a business that litigates a lot, and that's naturally part of the business, then how are we doing in litigation? I think a lot of success of legal departments is nothing happened. Our intellectual property rights were not challenged because we've done our job well. We didn't have lots of disputes with our suppliers or customers because contracts were, well organized to start with. So I think that's always sort of one of the problems for measures of a legal department. To have a very quiet year and nothing has happened, that's probably hugely successful. But I think it'll probably become more apparent the sorts of things to be covered when we look at how do you put a strategy together. But yeah.
Yeah.
The thing I would add, the thing I would add, I agree with everything Simon said. I think, and I'd make this comment in respect of a strategy for any other department, whether it's marketing or it's finance or whatever, but also legal, is not to make it too complex. I think it needs to be understood, and certainly with the organisations we work with, it's quite often the case that people don't really, you ask the senior manager, do your employees understand the strategy, the corporate strategy, and well, they might do. And it's really, really important if you're going to be a successful organisation that you do understand the strategy and the employees understand the strategy. So I think it needs to be very clear. Again, often we'll ask about somebody senior in the organisation, what are the company's values? And frequently the person concerned doesn't really know what the values are. I mean, they should do. There may only be a few of them, but I think again it's very important to have a straightforward strategy. If you make it too complex, no one's going to understand it, or no one's going to bother to read it. So when we're putting together a legal or any other strategy, be clear. I know somebody who does something called a strategy on a page, and he does it for himself and does it for other people. And I think it's being something that's clearly understood is really key.
Yes,
I think some of the measures can be. I mean, I'm just picking up on what Ian said earlier about people, and I would think that for example, one idea could be, if you want to improve the image and performance of the legal team, that at the moment, no other business function, the engineers, the bankers, whatever it might be, would want lawyers in on their regular meetings. And if over the course of a year you can change that, so they say it's always helpful to occasionally have one of the legal team in, not we've got a legal problem, but we want them just sitting alongside us to hear what we're talking about, what we're interested in. That could be a strategy within the legal team. Let's just get closer to the business and be welcomed into their world. That could be part of a strategy, and you can measure if that happens.
Can I just add again, I know we've already talked about this, but I do think it's important to emphasize the importance of alignment with your strategy. And I remember listening to a story about a chief exec, and he went to present to the legal team, and he talked about the company, compared the company, used a metaphor with the company being like a car, and he said, what do you think that to the legal team, what do you think the legal department, what part of the car would it be? And they sort of discussed it, and they decided that actually they thought that the legal team should be the steering wheel. It should be actually driving where they were going. And the chief said, well, that's fine, but actually you say that, but I think that's probably more asked the corporate development team. I see the legal team as the brakes. We can go off on all sorts of whizzy things that we want to do and very exciting things, but often we're not. We're being a bit too, cavalier about what we do. We don't. And we need somebody like you to sense us, and to occasionally we need to be, for you to slow us down to make sure that we don't do something that's reckless. So I think that's why there's an importance to have that alignment between the corporate strategy and the legal strategy.
Yeah, I think a constructive enabling role to help the execution and implementation of the business. With that mindset, we will find ourselves in the room rather outside the room with these management meetings. I think that's one takeaway. I think, of course, the other is prioritization, because you can have 100 objectives, but then there's only that much time and bandwidth even legal teams have. So one must prioritize, I guess, to see what are the most fundamental objectives, not only from a legal standpoint, but for the management and the business team. So I think that would be another, I would say, something to keep in mind. Coming to examples, again, both Simon, Bian, can you give some examples from your experience? Now, having set out these objectives, how does one test and assess whether one has performed and how have they fared in terms of achieving these goals? How will you go about doing that?
Well, I think, the sort of first thing we would want to decide, or you should decide, is what type of generic strategy that you're going to undertake. And when we look at in-house teams, there are, you've got to remember that you're not there by right. It comes back to what Simon was saying in the elevator pitch. When the CEO says, well, why have we got 14 lawyers? We could just go and use an external law firm rather than bothering with all you people in the department. So I think when you're looking at actually the strategies that that you can pursue, that there can be a number. I mean, one of them, of course, is cost advantage. Is it going to be more cost effective to have an in-house team rather than using external lawyers all the time? Now, of course, the advantage with using an external lawyer is you hopefully only pick up the phone when you actually need a specific piece of advice and specific piece of support. Whereas if you've got an in-house team, they're there all the time, so you're paying them. They're paying them whether they're doing anything or not. I mean, hopefully they are, and I have to say, and I'm sure Simon and you would agree, Prasajit, that it's rare for in-house lawyers to be twiddling their thumbs doing nothing. We all tend to be pretty busy, but one of the advantages is, of course, cost. And so actually looking at why what your strategy is going to be, and if you were having that conversation with the chief executive in the elevator, you could say, well, we've got 14 of us because actually there's a cost advantage in having an in-house team rather than you having to use lots of external law firms all the time and go directly to them. So that's one reason why you might look at having a legal strategy. If you were putting down cost advantage. Secondly, the speed of results. If I'm looking at my career, some people would come and see me about an issue straight away. They could just walk over to my desk and say, Ian, got this issue. Can you give some advice on this? So part of your strategy should look at, again, an advantage of having somebody within the business who can advise on legal matters. And actually, that the advantage there is that I will know the business much better than any external law firm can. I may well think, actually, I need to ring Prasajit up on this particular issue because he's an expert in M&A. This is an M&A issue. Yes, I can give some generic advice, but I can also make sure that then I've got some extra expertise on this. And hopefully, because we're both lawyers, there's an advantage in me giving clear instructions to you. You might not get such clear instructions from somebody within the business. I mean, what I'm saying there is that it should be part of your legal strategy, is you should know how to instruct external lawyers, and that is not as easy as I think lawyers sometimes think it is. So I think you've got two things there. You've both got a speed and also a competitive advantage. Again, a cultural issue of why you would have somebody in the business.
Terrific. I think, Simon, you want to supplement here on that?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay.
Well, maybe just sort of anecdotally. I mean, we've got these ideas that the reasons for having the in-house legal team can be cost saving. Another heading we would give it is governance, and the elevator test version of that is we're here to keep the directors out of prison. That's what we, the lawyers, do. That's what we do. We make sure that the business can open for business tomorrow. Your licenses, if you're a bank or a pharmaceutical company, are not revoked, and the directors don't get in trouble. So that would be another reason. Another is competitive advantage. If we're the in-house team at Microsoft, we want to make sure that Microsoft is competing effectively in the world of technology against its competitors. How can we help do that? When I was part of the small in-house legal team at American Express, I think that's what was driving us. We want to help Amex be better than Diners Club, Barclaycard, the other business card providers, and travel. I was part of the team that looked after travel and travelers' checks, as they were there. But I think that was our focus. And then there's this possible element of speed. We want to help the business work at pace. And partly that, I know, again, going back to financial services, where they had trading floors and the people sat at screens doing important business in the moment. And in some of those businesses, literally, they had the lawyers sitting alongside the traders and those business people, so that they didn't, send a memo and can you get back to me in 3 weeks with your view on this? It's now, what do I do? So they're helping the speed of the business. So those are very different reasons for having lawyers in as part of the organisation.
Can I just add one thing on that? I mean, and again, it's important for everybody on this call to why they should have a legal strategy, but also why they should be clear on what the legal strategy is before they ever join the organisation.
Yeah.
Because depending on what type of lawyer you want to be, that will be important. So I'll give you an example. When I worked in retail, we used external law firms. We had a panel of about 8, but we did a lot of the work in-house, and we, if it was something like IP or there's a big corporate transaction, of course we would go externally. But we enjoyed actually doing the work in-house. I worked for a major financial services organisation where it was very much expected that really all the in-house lawyers did was manage the external lawyers, and actually it was a legal management role. They wanted all the legal work to come through the legal team. The people in the business weren't allowed to deal with the external lawyers, but it was very much a management role, so it wasn't anywhere near as interesting. It was just going to one of the, in the UK, one of the what we call the magic circle firms, and getting legal advice. So it was a very different legal strategy. That legal strategy, which the financial services organisation had determined, was you are there as a legal team to manage the external lawyers in advising us. You're not there actually to do a lot of the work yourself. So it's it depends on what type of lawyer you want to be, but if you really want to get your hands dirty and get in and do legal work, then that probably wouldn't suit you. Alternatively, if you like that sort of thing, you really want to do more management, and then that would suit you. So very key to be clear on what the legal strategy is before you ever join the organisation.
Right. Very interesting. So I think lots of strategies. It's very clear, which can be, kind of identified: cost, competitive advantage, speed, and many others in sync with the management's decision. Now, but next question is, with so many things to do, how, and why, and what will you recommend that how does the GC team, in-house team, prioritize and decide on which options and general strategies to pursue? How does one decide that? What would be the relevant parameters and metrics?
Shall I take this one to start
Yep.
with? I mean, I think the first thing, and I would say we say this with not only with lawyers but also with companies as a whole, is not to try and do too much. You can't do everything. And in fact, as I'm sure most people on this call will recognise, you'll have limited resources, but lots and lots and lots of things to do. And one of the things you'll find when you go in-house, and particularly if a company hasn't had an in-house team before, is that all of a sudden you're a bit of a victim of your own success. People start coming to you, they start saying, oh, we've got a new general counsel, Simon McCaw. I've dealt with him, he's really good, very approachable. I was going to go out to an external firm. I won't bother to do that. Now I'll just go and see Simon, which is a nice feeling for Simon. But if everybody says that, Simon's not going to be going home at all. He's going to be sat at his desk working all day. So I think it's I think that you've got to bear that in mind. I think that you can't do everything. That's the first thing I'd say. There will be things you will have to decide as part of your strategy that you don't deal with, or that you might say. I mean, Simon mentioned the HR, the human resources department. You might say, well, look, we'll let them do some of the more basic legal work and ask that they only call us in when it's a really difficult issue that needs to be dealt with, because otherwise we're going to be doing everything. Again, it could be, your strategy could be that you only look at contracts over a certain value. I mean, there is a danger in that, because of course a small contract could cause you lots of problems. But you might think, well, actually, if it's peripheral to what we do, if we're for example, a major retailer, we'll look at our major supply contracts because they're worth millions and millions, but we're not actually going to look at the contract for the photocopier. So I think first, being clear that you can't do everything. And secondly, again, it comes back to the corporate strategy. I would always think you want to talk to your CEO or your executive team. You may or may not be on the executive team as the general counsel. You want to talk to them about what they're expecting. What do they want you to do and what they don't want you to do, so that you can then be clear about what the legal strategy of the department will be. If they say to you, actually, we outsource all the property work, then that's fine. I mean, in one of my roles, the property team used to instruct lawyers directly, external lawyers directly. I have to say they would come and see me occasionally. They knew far more about property law than I did, which was helpful. So again, I wouldn't do, with our team wouldn't deal with that type of work because we didn't need to.
It's interesting Ian mentions that, because it actually takes me back to a conference I was speaking at, conference seminar. There are about 20, 30 people in the room, Inhouse Counsel, and someone said, just not quite casually, and of course, when our marketing people go to outside lawyers, and suddenly, 2 or 3 people in the room said, what you allow your business people to go straight to outside counsel? Surely that's forbidden. Surely you can't allow them to do that. Everything must come through the legal department. Well, resolving that, I don't know whether you call it a strategy or a protocol or whatever you call it, but that, we trust, because we've educated them, we trust some of the business people to go straight out to outside lawyers. That's fine. In some organizations, absolutely no, everything must channel through the legal team. I mean, that's quite an interesting debate to have and to be clear about.
And if I can just come back to what Simon says, just to support that, and one of the things you might want to do as an in-house team is have your one-page strategy, and make sure that other people in the organization know that. So if, as Simon says, you don't let people go directly to outside counsel, then make that clear in that one pager. So if it's only a one pager, people hopefully read it.
Interesting. Though I would not mind business people reaching out to me, but yeah, I think as a legal strategy, maybe for GCs they would want that. But I think we have talked about briefly and in vaguely, I would say, about what legal strategy is, how to go about formulating strategy. But let's dive a little bit deeper. So how do you create? What steps will you take to formulate a legal strategy? What will you assess? Is one thing to say prioritize, dovetail your interest with the business interest, but how does one do that? That's the fundamental question I think people would want to know.
Will I kick off on that?
Yeah.
I'm looking down at a particular page in the book we've written where we've got a heading which says step-by-step approach to creating legal strategy. And I think the starting point is you think about the organization. The business might be a not-for-profit, but the business assume, and then think of its business environment. So the business environment for a pharmaceutical company is going to be different to the business environment for financial services business or a IT company. So what are its markets? What's the geography? Who are the competitors? What are the trends within the business? So you're looking at that like the business is. What's the business environment? And then as a result of that, what are the legal risks that come with that business environment? So if you're very international, is there political uncertainty that creates legal risks? Are there competitors who are particularly wanting to expand and eat your business? So you look through the business environment and think through, therefore, and we need to understand what is the business strategy of our organization. We've talked about that. Then you think about, okay, so if this is the universe of legal risks, these are all the possible legal risks, and we'll probably come on to this, opportunities. So what are the priorities within that? Because it's easy to say, well, we'll do everything, or we'll do everything in-house. So then it's prioritizing which legal services, legal products, if you like, certainly the in-house team needs to provide, and what goes outside. So again, sort of anecdotally, when I worked at American Express, we had probably what seems like a very small 4-person legal team in-house that dealt with the card business for Europe, Middle East and Africa. And then we had, well, 4 other resources, 3 different types of law firms. We had Magic Circle firms or a Magic Circle firm for, bet the farm type issues. If there was a big M&A, would come someone like you for the big M&A issues. Then we had a smaller, almost round the corner legal firm that we could walk around and talk to, who handled some of the employment things. We didn't have an employment specialist within the team. And then we had a separate law firm, which was bigger, out in the countryside somewhere, that was highly automated, and they did all the work on chasing debts, collecting for people who hadn't paid their American Express card bill. So the in-house legal team didn't touch that. That was the sort of prioritizing. I spent most of my time looking at contracts with the main people who accepted the card, the airline companies, the hotel companies. So that's how we prioritized and focused how we would spend our time. And then when you look at the, what are these legal risks? What are our priorities? Then you look at the resources, and your resources are the in-house legal team, external and business people within the organization. And I don't think you haven't asked it, and I'm not sure if any of the your people on this webinar, but the question that often gets asked is, so how large should our legal team be? And I think that's always putting it back to front. It's not as though you can say 50,000 employers equals legal team of 200, or 25 employees means a legal team of 4 people. It doesn't work like that. It's not generated just by size, it's by what are the priorities. So I think those are the sort of steps you go through. But I always think with putting a strategy together, we've said the word, Ian said it many times, but you start with what are the values of the organization. That's where you start, culture and values. Then I think about process. How will we put this legal strategy together? Who's going to be involved? Is it just going to be the general counsel sitting on his or her own at her desk and I will create the legal strategy? Do the whole legal team get involved? How many of the business people get involved? So what's the process? Because if the process is right, people are more likely to buy in and believe in the strategy. And then it's about communication. Who needs to know about this strategy? So that's part of the planning of putting the strategy together.
Well, I think what I would say, and it comes back to one of the practical points of putting your legal strategy together, or put in indeed any department or the corporate as a whole, is from time to time. I mean, Simon mentioned the GC sitting at their desk designing the legal strategy, but actually getting your team together and having a strategy day once a year, seeing are we still aligned to the corporate strategy? What's gone well, what's hasn't gone so well, where should we be developing our strategy? Other things extra things we should do, things that we should stop doing. I think it's important to have that sort of once a year sense check, and then that allows you to sort of amend your one pager and revise it and send it out to the business.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very, comprehensive take on this question. I think there's one more question which, if I put myself in the shoes of a GC, would be there are two types of role. What we heard from both of you, one, the defensive role of kind of compliance and making sure nothing goes wrong, and that's in itself a success in many ways. If there is no bad news, that's itself a success. The other is really being proactive and doing something which is value additive, and whether you protect your trademark, do something which saves and helps the companies. How do you kind of strike a balance between two roles which can be potentially played by an in-house team? One of compliance, the second value addition.
Shall I start, Simon? I think all of us as in-house lawyers get the comment from time to time. I certainly did when I was one. You could be more proactive and less reactive. And I think what we have to remember is that often we are firefighting. So I can remember coming into my office on various occasions with I'm quite structured and a list of things I was going to do that day, and then something the chief exec would say, Ian, I need you in on this, and everything went out of the window. I didn't get through anything on my list. I actually had to deal with what he or she wanted me to do. I think the first thing to say is, yes, we are sort of reactive and focused on the compliance side of the role a lot of the time, but that's because other people are reactive in the business, and so we are just in a sense reacting to what they do. I think in terms of trying to add value, I think it is things like again, some things we've alluded to, looking at things that risks in the business and assessing whether the legal team needs to be involved in those or whether they're a legal issue. I remember talking to a GC once, and it's not something I would have done. He was obviously less risk averse than I am, but he said, a very small part of our business is regulated by the financial services regulator in the UK. And I have said to people in the business, if they come to me and say, if we do this, what are the ramifications? I said, well, technically we will be, well, not technically, we will be breaching X regulation, and the penalty for doing that is this. But it's up to you whether you go and do that. Now, personally, I would take I'm sure Simon would take a more, well, no, we're not going to allow the company to start breaching regulations or breaking the law. This particular GC obviously took the view that, well, at the end of the day, it's down to you. If you choose to do that, that's up to you. I think it's a big reputational risk. But you can see that there's his idea of compliance and control was probably very different to a lot of other people. So I think that's on the sort of compliance side. I think on the proactive side, it is again trying to look at where you can save costs. So for example, if you go in-house, you can look at the external legal panel and you might find actually we've got 12 firms on the panel. We don't really need 12, we need 8. We'll use them more effectively, review them more. I do think one of the things, and I guess this comes back to culture more than anything, is when you use external firms successfully, it is a true partnership. And one of the things I found in one of my GC roles when I went in was that the HR department, or somebody in the HR department who dealt with the external law firms on employment matters, was very pleased that the rate they had got with one of our external panel firms, because he said it's been the same for years, and I know they're losing money. And I said, well, our values as an organisation are to make sure that we treat our suppliers properly and well, and that doesn't really accord if we're actually finding that the external firm is losing money. So actually, we stopped doing that. We made sure that they actually, were paid properly and reasonably. I think that's important. So whilst I think, and actually, to be frank, the advice improved, because if you're not going to make money from a relationship, you're not going to put the energy and resources into it. So that's one way you could be proactive, making sure that you're getting, the right number of firms, the right external firms supporting you, and that will be more cost effective in the long term, and you'll get the right advice, and that's obviously key. So that would be an example of a proactive element. I think also just going out. One of the things I'm sure Simon did as well when he was at American Express is going out and meeting people in the business and just trying to say, look, this is what we do, this is what the legal team's about, this is how we can help you. So that's another way of being proactive. You don't want to, as I say, be a victim of your own success and find that you're getting inundated with issues. But I think it is a proactive approach.
So I think a connected question in some ways, is fine. We have a strategy. We are trying to strike a balance between, being proactive and what could be value addition, etc. But there could be circumstances beyond your control. So let's say, how much does the financial circumstances and the goals and objective of the company may impact the legal strategy?
Well, shall I? Or you
Go on, Ian. Go on.
No, again, it comes back. I'll just make a very quick point before Simon comes in. Again, it comes back to what you can do. You can't do everything, and if you've got like Amex, I mean, Amex is a huge organisation, and in the Europe and Middle East area where Simon was in, to have a legal department of 4 it's quite a small team for a big organisation. And you have to prioritize. You can't, unless you're there, 24 hours a day, you're going to have to say, right, we can deal with these things, we can't deal with other things, and the company has to make a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, responding to the financial circumstances of the business, I think that's a very good point. And I think this is where I think it did happen when I was at Amex for one year, and basically, headquarters said, we need to reduce costs by 10%, and that includes headcount or just expenditure generally. And I think part of your point earlier, President Jeff, about being aligned with the business is, okay, that applies to us too. Not, oh, we're lawyers, we're special. That doesn't apply to the legal team. Surely it applies to marketing and all those other people. But no, we're part of the business. Okay, so how can we reduce our costs? We've got to do the same thing. I think that's an important part of the being part of the business.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think that's very critical. I think definitely the financial conditions will have an impact, and one must be kind of awake to that situation. And really, I'm going to a very important facet now, people, because ultimately it's the caliber of the people who will really determine how well your project is implemented and strategy is implemented. So, while doing all this, what about people and getting the right skills in the right place at the right time? How important is that, and how does one go about it?
Well, I think a number of things I would or I believe are important. I mean, firstly, again, I'm going to bang on about it, but coming back to the culture, it's not just the skills, it's getting the right people who will fit the particular organization. And again, I'll give you an example. I remember going for a role as head of governance for a big retailer in the UK, and it was handled through a headhunter and executive search consultancy. And the guy rang me back and said, Ian, you've got all the right skills for this job. You'd be able to, technically absolutely fantastic, but you won't really fit the culture. So I can put you forward, but I don't think you'll have a happy time there. And he was absolutely right. I mean, I won't mention the name of the organisation, but I mean, Simon will know it. And it would have been a very aggressive culture. Now, for some lawyers who are very, you do get aggressive lawyers, it would be fine. I'm not a particularly aggressive personality, and I would have just sunk in that role. So I think the first thing is, yes, you do need skills, and you need to get the right skills, but you actually need people who are going to fit within the organisation, because you spend a lot of time at work. If you're an in-house lawyer, that's particularly so. So if it's an organization that doesn't really chime with your values and your ethos and the sort of culture you want to work in, then there's no point going there. So, for example, if you in the UK, for example, and I'm sure it's the same elsewhere in the world, you work for some of the big banks, they're long hours cultures. If that's not something you want, then you probably best to look at an alternative role. It may be less well paid, but you've got to make sure that it's something that fits what your lifestyle and what you want to do. I think secondly, I always think that getting people with a broad background, corporate, commercial, is probably a really good base, but it depends. I mean, again, if you're a big department, a big legal department, you may have a specialist employment lawyer, and clearly there you've got to have somebody who's got an employment background. But I think, for me, it's getting people with a broad base, because I think also one of the reasons that a lot of people go in-house, and I would count myself, and I don't know whether Simon would say the same, is that I didn't want to be a specialist. I didn't want to be very narrow in what I did. I wanted a very broad generalist career, and I've had that. I've been very lucky. I've done everything from criminal to corporate, and so getting somebody who's got something of what you want, but might want to develop other areas, other interests in the business is important. I had a lawyer working for me once who, she was pigeonholed and into a particular area of financial services, and was described by the general counsel as an underperformer. Well, that's because she'd just been pushed to one side and doing one thing. When she was allowed to do other things, she actually thrived. So I think it's making sure that people have the right opportunities. Part of your legal strategy, again, is your people. People are everything really to any organisation. So making sure that you're talking over with them, from time to time or regularly, what they want to do, and that way you'll develop their skills. I remember going into it was my first job in financial services, and said, we're taking you on, Ian, because we could take on somebody who's much more experienced, but actually they'll find the role pretty boring because they can do it. We want somebody who's going to grow into the role. So, and I think when I've recruited, I've tried to do that as well, making sure that people have the chance to develop.
Yeah, and I think Jan, very well put. And also, I would just add 2 cents, basis my discussions with my general counsel friends. I think the whole legal fraternity is so dynamic. So I think continuous training must be done to the in-house teams, whether through programs like what Ketan is running right now, and because that's always helps you stay abreast with the recent developments. And the softer skills, very important, that communication both internally, because once you have a large team, you as a legal head cannot be talking to everyone. You will delegate to other team members. And the softer skill, how to interact with external counsels or different parts of management teams, very important, because sometimes wrong step in communication may yield unfruitful results. So I think very important that continuous endeavor in focus is given on these aspects, also the softer skill and of course the technical aspects. With that, I think it's time to head into the Q&A session as we go to the last 15 minutes. Let's see what we have got here. I can see some questions in chat box. This is the first question from Shelly Saluja. Just reading out, many a times in-house legal teams are considered a mere conduit between a company and outside counsel. How this mindset can be changed? And having said that, there are many times when in-house counsels are completely dependent on the outside counsel due to lack of expertise in a particular area of law. How does one reconcile such situations?
I'd say that's a classic case for having a legal strategy that the business understands. We are not trying to be experts in these three areas, and that's why it's not a failing that we then go to outside counsel. That's absolutely the way we've organized this. If you don't want to pay for 200 lawyers who can do everything, then if you're only going to have 5 lawyers, then these are the areas where we will go out and rely on outside counsel. And part of the legal in-house team role, the general counsel role, is how do we select and manage and supervise and get good performance from these outside law firms. That would be my initial response to that.
And I would add, really building on something that Simon said earlier on today, he talked about his definition of the legal function, and it not just being in-house, but also being external. Certainly that was my approach, that when I was a GC, that I would make sure that it wasn't just the in-house, but it was my external panel lawyers who were part of that function that I could bring in. So, it's not a question of thinking there's a complete separation of powers in that. And I've got no idea on this area of law, so I have to bring Simon in because he's the expert. We are part of one team. He might work for McCall and Co. As the external law firm, but actually he's part of my team for this, and I want to make sure that we're seen as one function. I think the other thing I would say, something I said earlier on, is that one of the advantages of having in-house counsel is often they instruct external counsel in the right way. So it's not a case of me not being an expert. It's actually making sure that Simon's got clear instructions so that he can do the best he can in advising me and advising the company.
Yeah, well, very well put. I think I hope Shelly that answers your question. So mix of both. I think you need external counsels. There's a need and utility of that, but there are some tips which Ian and Simon have shared, which you follow that in formulating a strategy, implementing it. That will change the perception and the role which many in-house counsels do. Second question, I think, which we have got is what do you think are the challenges that in-house counsels faced in their day-to-day activities? I think one is what Shelly asked, I think, but could be other challenges, I would say. Yeah.
I think, and hopefully this helps answer the question, but again, it's a personal anecdote, and it was after I finished working as an in-house lawyer and I was working as a consultant and helping run an MBA for lawyers, and we were asked to work with, or in between, one of the very large worldwide pharmaceutical companies and the law firm in the UK that they were going to use. And they wanted to set up a different way of working. And obviously the in-house legal team would have been part of this, but we were actually working with the law firm to help them understand how the ultimate client, the pharmaceutical company, wanted to work. And they just wanted a different way of doing things. And one of the expressions I always remembered from that was, there's often a expression, probably everyone's heard it, the leave no stone unturned approach to lawyering. We've got to be incredibly thorough and look at every single possibility and every single problem. And this company said, no, we do not want that. We do not want that. We want you to prioritize, if there are 10 stones, look under 4 of them if you think those are the most important. And we will not blame you if the ninth stone that you didn't look under, there was a problem there. We're going to be mature and adult in this relationship. So we don't want to pay you for looking under 10 stones, and we're not going to sue you if you missed something because that wasn't the priority. Now, that's a very high level example, but I think that does impact on what the day-to-day role of a lawyer might be. You want me to look at this contract? I could do that for 2 weeks. If you want an answer this afternoon, which are the 2 areas you want me to focus on? Okay, I'll prioritize. It's such a obviously important word, that prioritize. What do you really want me to look at?
I'd agree with that. I was going to say workload is one of the things, and you will have to prioritize, otherwise you're going to be there all day. I think the other thing to be careful about is the words. We want you to be commercial, because that can mean lots of things. But one of the things it can mean is, oh, thanks, Simon, for looking. Just look at the contract for me. You haven't got much time, and don't come up with lots of issues. That is, I'm using Simon really as a form of validation. If it goes wrong, then I can blame him, and say, well, I would pass it in front of legal. We have in the UK a big scandal with one of our organisations where the lawyers are now in the focus of both our legal regulators, and that's because certain people or certain employees ended up going to prison unjustifiably. Some of the work that was done or seems to be done. And what I would say to you or anybody on this call is, you have to remain true to yourself. You have to, you'll have certain regulatory requirements if you're working as a lawyer, and that you have to comply with. And so I think one of the challenges is, making sure that you are helpful, you're approachable in your in-house role, but you have to stand your ground. You have to be, if you're being pressurized to do something which is unethical, you must stand your ground. I always used to think, lawyers will get a reputation for saying no, and a bad reputation. And actually, it taught me, what taught me more about this was working with a general counsel who would say no in a very aggressive and unpleasant way. In fact, I remember seeing a series of emails that she was rushing copying me in. I was working there as a consultant, or an interim consultant, interim lawyer, and she had a email conversation that started being, right. She was writing emails in red, and the font was getting bigger and bigger as the argument went on. And I said to her, there's a nice way to say no. You can do it in a pleasant way. So you don't think you've got to be defensive about it, but you do need to stand your ground. So that's one of the challenges, being true to yourself and your profession.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's wonderfully put. And I think on the last point about the font size increasing, I always feel in negotiations one should be firm in one's viewpoint, but polite in the words you choose to express. I think that's the best way to really drive home the point. But yeah, I think some of these tips, wonderful tips, really followed. One can avoid some of the challenges in day-to-day life. I think one last question we can squeeze in, and how can we not have a question about technology in today's day and age, where we are really flooded with technological inventions, including chat GPT and whatnot. How important is technology in the legal strategy? What role does it play? How can we maximize it as, let's say, for the in-house community?
Well, I think, as Simon will agree with me, neither Simon nor I are leaders in technology. We're just thinking back to some things we've done together when we've had issues with our IT support. But I think it's very important. In the way that you do things, and the all sorts of different tools and techniques that you can have. But what I would say is technology should be treated as a tool. I mentioned the word tool. It is just that, and it shouldn't take over your life. And for me, we've all been impacted by COVID, and doing things like this is great. It means you can reach a much wider audience. But there is nothing like going to talk to people and not relying on just technology and dealing with people by email. going to talk and getting to know people. So, and we may have a situation in the future where artificial intelligence plays a greater role. I'm sure it will do, plays a greater role in what we do. That obviously could have an impact on the need for, or the certain number of in-house lawyers. But for me, there's nothing like actually getting together face to face and discussing issues and challenges.
Yeah, I'd just add perhaps two areas where technology can be useful. One is sort of knowledge management. How do we capture knowledge that's usable, so that, if one of your lawyers leaves, their knowledge doesn't walk out with them? How can we capture that? And technology can help with that. And also just looking at another area, a whole area of work in the legal sector, is legal operations. Just how does work get done? It's the equivalent of, if you're manufacturing cars and pieces of metal appear at one end of the production line and a fully finished car comes out the other end. What are the steps along the way that enable that car to be put together? Well, if you've got a brand new contract, what are the steps along the way to negotiating, finalizing, checking, supervising the operation of a contract? Can that be captured using technology that could help us do that in the future? So I think the knowledge management would be a key area for technology to assist.
Splendid points. I think really both Ian and Simon, this is a very important aspect, and one should ensure to preserve knowledge through all the technical avenues available in today's day and age. As we head towards the poll, I think before that, if I can request Ian and Simon, very briefly, if you can take away, share 2 or 3 key takeaways from this session for our audience members, that would be great.
Okay. Well, if I go first, and it's interesting, as we've been talking, I'm just thinking back to interesting memories. So my takeaways would be, I was incredibly proud when I left Amex that I had a thank you and good luck card, and how many people in the business signed it. It wasn't just the legal team. And that was tremendous. I'd made an effort to go out and meet these people and work with them and show interest in their work. So I think one of my takeaways would be, as an in-house lawyer, be in listening mode, be in real listening mode. Go out, meet people, listen to them, let them be enthusiastic about what they do in the business. And another takeaway for me would be induction for in-house lawyers. Excuse me, when an in-house lawyer comes into the business, again, my memory, one at American Express, quite quickly I went down to the operations center where there were all the people manning the phones, and there was a screen up there saying how long customers were waiting to get through to speak to someone. And I thought, wow, now this is the heart of the business. And it really left an impact with me. So think about the induction for in-house lawyers and getting them connected with the organization.
Yeah.
I suppose to me, just to perhaps reiterate some of the points we've talked about today. Firstly, strategy is important, but culture more so. So I think when putting strategy together, remember the culture will have a great impact on what you do. Secondly, make it straightforward. If your strategy is going to be clearly understood within the business, it needs to be, in a summary form. I mean, we as lawyers don't always write succinctly, but we need to. And if you don't understand the strategy, no one else will. So you need to make sure it's straightforward. And thirdly, and this isn't a criticism of lawyers, but a criticism of companies as a whole, is make sure you implement it. We often find organizations spend a lot of time developing their strategy, but then don't do anything with it. It's a bit like that major contract you spend ages drafting and negotiating and signing, and then it sits in the drawer. So you need to make sure you implement it, which again goes back to making it straightforward.
Yeah.
Wonderful. That's a lovely recap. I think to round off the key points. I think thank you, Simon and Ian, for your thoughts, which were extremely insightful. Before closing, I would like to ask each of you to respond to the poll slide on your screen to provide your feedback on today's webinar. We take this very seriously as part of our continuous improvement program. Prajay, can you please project the poll slide on the screen? It should pop up anytime now. There you go. So you have a minute, so kindly just share your feedback. I will just wait for a minute and also go to the conclusion, and then we can wrap up. We have overshot the webinar by a couple of minutes, so my sincere apologies, but I hope it was worth your while. There you go. So thanks to everyone who participated in the poll. Finally, I would like to thank Simon and Ian, who were outstanding, and also all of you, our lovely audience, for your time and attention. I hope you found the webinar interesting and a worthwhile investment of your valuable time. We certainly thoroughly enjoyed bringing this to you. After the webinar, as I mentioned, we will send you a copy of the summary notes from today's webinar. We will also separately receive a request for your feedback on the webinar. Please take the time to send us your feedback, comments, criticism, and even compliments. Everything is welcome. The form will take barely less than a minute, so please do complete it. If you're interested in securing in-house training on any other matters related to this webinar, please do not hesitate to contact us. Our contact information is set out in the slides on the screen, as you can see. Thank you for your attendance today, and we look forward to being with you again at Inhouse Counsel Forum. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Prasenjit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.